Hello, welcome to Kenty Prime Time. Paul Kent here, and we're going to put our big brains on today. We're going to try and see if we can try to lift the tide a little bit in rugby league land. Joining me today is obviously once again Johnny Elias, and from the Rugby League Players Association, Clint Newton, the Chief Executive. Clint, thanks for coming along, mate.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, John.
Let me start. Can I just
jump in?
Yeah, I do want to jump in.
Yep,
you
go
two.
ahead.
I'm surprised, honestly surprised you had him as a guest here today, Paul. Every time I've seen you two together, I'm not joking, you're always arguing.
Yeah.
Opinions are different. Can one of you please explain?
There is a bit of speculation around that we don't like each other, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. I reckon it's one of the most asked questions that sometimes I get is,
Oh, really?
There you go.
My consistent answer is that I've never not liked you. I think that the point is that you had to play a role for your previous employer, and I respect that. But I mean, there's never been a time in which I don't think you were doing your job, and my job is to make sure that the players are represented and their voices are heard. And that doesn't mean to say we're going to agree all the time, does it?
Well, look, we don't often agree, to be fair.
Yeah.
But from my point of view with all that, mate, I've never had a personal problem with you. I just think that, look, I know you've got, when I say agenda, I don't mean that in a devious way. You've got your intentions, is probably a nicer way to say that, of what you're trying to achieve with the Players Association. And that's, not that I've really got anything I want to achieve either, like an agenda there from my own point of view. Like I'm not the NRL arguing against you, but I do think that the fans need to be represented sometimes.
Absolutely.
And in a lot of this corporate sort of world that you guys operate in, you and the NRL, and you sit down at the bargaining table and you try and go through things, I get concerned at different times that the fans are the ones getting left out of all this. That your obligation primarily is to the NRL players, less so than the game of rugby league. I think
that's the misconception. I mean, of course, my focus is to make sure that our members and our constituents are protected and their voices are heard. But ultimately, I'm a fan of the game too. I mean, I grew up around the game, so my intentions are pure when it comes to, like, do I want the game to be the best game in this hemisphere, pound for pound, the best game in the world? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do I have an ability to do that by representing the players' interest? Absolutely. And so my job is to make sure that we strike a balance between advancing the game and eroding rights of players, or not ensuring that players are properly protected in what is the most brutal game in the world. Both of you have played it. Both of you understand the risks that come with the game. And the players need a voice because they have all come from grassroots. They have all come from playing junior rugby league, and actually they're all very community focused. And now with the women and the men, we've got a great opportunity to represent both.
Well, that's one of my issues. I think whenever you guys sit down at the collective bargaining table to reach the agreement there, with you and the NRL, is a lot of the argument comes in about player wages, salary cap, player rights, and one of my chief arguments is the lack of funding to grassroots footy, and the fact that, I'll defy anybody to find anyone different. But if you can find me one bloke who's played NRL football, who's not played for a grassroots footy club, then I'll give it away. Like they've all come from somewhere, other than obviously, if you want to bring up the rugby union, forget that. But I'm talking about that's where they've all come through. And my argument is too much of the game, the funding that's coming into the game, particularly in the last 10 years, is going into the game, and it's basically going straight into the current players' pockets. And certainly that's the perception. Yeah. And that the NRL, we're seeing what they're doing in recent years with how much money. We'll get sort of deeper into this a little bit later, but what they're doing with the money, and yet grassroots clubs are bleeding, and actually worse, they're actually many of them are folding.
Yeah, and I think that, you're right. The perception is that, that players have taken from grassroots. But let me be clear, is that in the last collective bargaining agreement, we never touched grassroots funding. We never once in our proposals did we say that we were going to erode the money that was tagged to go there? And that was, north of, $480, $500 million over the 5-year term.
That's NRL money.
That is from all the money that is generated.
Yep.
And there's excluded revenue. So, so like government grants to go towards community initiatives, contra, so advertising on, broadcast, those types of things. But of all the money that comes into the game, excluding club revenue, because they're not in it, then the NRL distributes that out through negotiations with us and the states and the clubs, and then they retain some. So they'll retain enough to run their head office. That's obviously, debatable about how much they need. Then you've got us. So we'll take, for every $100, the player's share is $43.50. Right. That pays for all player salaries. That pays for all the funds. So your injury hardship fund, your past player medical support fund, your wellbeing and education program, your retirement account, your rep payments, RLPA payments, all of that comes from that $43.50, right? That 78% of it goes to player salaries. The rest we have to then strategically work through to protect the players both during and post-career, because the risk is, like it was pre-2003, everything goes to salaries. And I think both of you know that is not a safe model. Like when you look at, particularly if you look at COVID, if we had just had 100% distribution into salaries, we wouldn't have had any money to be able to offset the losses there. Now,
you're talking about the game there, not the players.
Yes. So again, it's where does that $500 odd million go, plus the discretionary amount that NRL have to spend on that? That's really becomes more of your question. And again, states are funded out of that. You had Ben Eichen on the show the other week, but if country, regions, and clubs there, and living on the Central Coast, I see some of the issues that exist in country football, even from a facilities perspective, where, my daughter's playing for the Kingumba Colts. They have one shed. Yeah. And girls around, Sydney metro country and all those types of things, with the rise of women's participation and girls' participation, does the game have the infrastructure at that level, to be able to sustain that growth? Because my daughter's getting changed behind, bushes and in the car and stuff like that. So, where does the money go? That's probably more of the question. And, what is...
So you're saying, is that a question for you, or is that a question for the NRL?
Well, it's a question for them. Obviously we have an interest in that money, because ultimately it's money that we could obviously claim against, but we don't, because we have to trust the game is going to invest that in the right way.
And are you trusting the game?
Yeah, are you trusting them?
Well, what I'd like to see is, an impact report on where that money's gone. What has happened to that money and how is the game benefiting? And is there an opportunity to improve and, give country, metro, Queensland, New South Wales, whatever clubs, the ability to, position for grants to help with their facility? Are those the sort of things that we need to look at? But outside of that, John and Paul, the clubs also have a large share of the funds as well. I mean, that's obviously they receive, of that $100, they get $16 of that, so 16%. But they retain all their revenues, so they don't contribute to the player share of revenue. So they don't pay the players' salaries from their share. Yeah. That is funded via the NRL. Yeah. So when people say...
Through the grant.
Yes. So when people say players are taking money from my club, that's not true, because it's a pass-through. So the NRL have it, pass it to clubs, they pass it to players. Yeah. Then obviously clubs get, $4.7+ million above player payments. So above the salary cap to spend at their discretion. Right. So if a club wanted to invest in, junior footy, which, a chunk of them do, not all, and it's discretionary again, and it's at varying levels. You've seen the Dragons make a particular interest more recently in investing in their junior pathways. Penrith obviously have invested, Knights, Brisbane, those sort of teams. that's for them to invest at their. So if in your area of your NRL club, if that is going backwards, then it's a question for, potentially the states and the NRL and the clubs.
Paul, so it's not compulsory for every club to invest in grassroots?
No. Dolphins have an agreement that they have to. I think it's $2 million, but it's not compulsory for every club to have an amount that must be allocated, not to my knowledge.
But can you make that compulsory?
Well, potentially in the next bargain, but ultimately that's the game's job. The ARLC was put in place to govern the game.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't, it's not just about elite level. It's top down, bottom up, and that's important.
Well,
how are you going to fix it, Paul? How do they fix this? Grassroots is so important.
Well, the problem we have at the moment, they're an absolute necessity.
Yeah.
The grassroots. The problem we're having at the game at the moment is for many years the whoever ran the rugby league, whether it's the ARL Commission, whether it's the old ARL, whether it was back in the day New South Wales Rugby League, their whole agenda was to, they had to foster the game from the bottom up, okay? But they're also a non-profit organisation, okay? They weren't there to, and that's why for many years, and it became a bit of a knock on, the NRL, that they had no money in the bank. Now, their agenda as a sporting body was whatever money came in, they had to reinvest in the game. So they never put that in the bank. Now, what's happened is we've all had a change of mind because of COVID. So COVID came in, put the game, made it vulnerable, okay? And, I've spoken about this before. When they agreed to go out and stop playing, the AFL, remember Todd Greenberg was the CEO of the NRL at the time and had an agreement with who was Dimitri McGill at the AFL. They had an agreement there that they would go out and not play, okay, for the welfare of the safety of the community and all that sort of bullshit.
That's right.
But what was happening, the problem with that was that the game was far more financial in AFL than it was in rugby league. And if they'd gone out and not played rugby league until September, by the time everybody came back, there would have been 4 clubs still surviving.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They would have all fallen over.
Yeah,
well, I mean...
And I think the AFL knew that, and they outplayed the NRL until Volandis got involved in it and looked at the actual figures of it and said, hang on a sec. That's why he then came back with the May 28th deadline. He said, no, we're back by this date. Because if it went much longer, the NRL was going to start losing clubs.
Well, we obviously, and that was why we backed in... Well, it's probably it is the most collaborative that we've ever worked. I mean, Peter and I were talking just about every day at 5:30 in the morning, and working through all that. And again, I backed in the fact that we had enough determination and enough willpower to, bring the game back. And players then had to back us in, that, we were doing it for the, good intention, but it was going to be done in the right way. And hence we saw, when you look at what the Warriors sustained, that they were on the tarmac, and we still hadn't got an agreement done at that point because we were stuck on a percentage that we wanted guaranteed for the players. And no one, I don't think, thought that Warriors would be in this country for 2 years.
Yeah.
No other sport had to deal with that. Yeah. No other group of players had to, relocate for 2 years away from that. And they were on the tarmac. And basically it was very much like, this is the deal to get the Warriors and every other player back to training, I think by May 4.
Yeah.
Then we were returning on, I think
28.
May 28.
Yeah. So
we got that deal done. We worked then, through that process to give... that was just to get it done then. Now, some of the other codes went early and did an agreement early, which, I believe that our deal ended up the best deal because we backed in the fact that we were going to come back. Because a lot of the other codes, like you said, didn't think they were going to come back till September.
Well,
so they took less. But one of the things that happened in that time was the clubs were going to get shortchanged in various for what money they were going to get. As basically a parachute payment to assist through that time. And I'd spoken to Peter about that at the time, and because I believed he was going to walk into a hornet's nest there, and he'd changed what was otherwise positioned, and he changed it to the benefit of the clubs, which is what we advocated for.
Yeah.
So we were very staunch at that time that the model wasn't working in my view and in our view, where, clubs weren't profitable.
Yeah.
They were going to operate, north of $60 million worth of losses over the term.
Yeah.
Now that's not sustainable.
Yeah. But the thing that's come out of it, and I don't know whether it's been corrected though, Clint, is rugby league suddenly felt very vulnerable and said, you know what, we've got no money in the bank.
Yep.
We've got nothing for a rainy day, so to speak. So if this, for example, and in this modern world we can never be sure, if another COVID outbreak sort of happens or something similar where the game has to shut down for a period or whatever, the game that didn't have any assets or any collateral money in the bank to be able to survive for any prolonged period. So out of that, we all changed our thinking. We okayed for the NRL to go out and invest. They went and they bought Barrows.
We okayed it.
Yeah.
Because we'd said that what the NRL, we were happy for the NRL to do was we reached an agreement in the CBA to go and invest in assets and build basically a war chest there to be able to manage Armageddon if it was to come again. So in the agreement, it was that they could build, which has been well reported, like a $300 million cash and asset base. Now, never in the
which they've exceeded.
Which,
and it was their idea.
Yeah, maybe. But that's okay. It's not about
get away from that. It's not about, just agree to it.
Yeah. So our thing was, it was that we wanted to co-invest effectively with them to say, this is necessary. Yes, go and do that. But then at the end of that, then we're sort of back to the way other codes operate, which is a revenue share. So when you outperform, so if you forecast that you're going to make $100 and you make $110, then players should receive some of that $10.
$10,
because they've been part of the outperformance.
Right.
So that's what ended up being the case.
Okay. So Peter V'landys has come out and he's spoken in recent times about the time is nearing where the NRL will go back to the negotiating table and start to negotiate a new television broadcast deal. At some point, and you can tell us this, at some point you guys will get involved to renegotiate the collective bargaining agreement. At what point, just quickly on that, do you get involved? Do you have to wait till the broadcast deal is done, or are you part of the process with the NRL? Like, what's your involvement? What's the players' involvement through that to get the outcome you need?
I mean, first and foremost, the players have got to back in, Peter and the leadership team to maximise the broadcast deal.
Yeah.
That's absolutely, and I believe that we've got a strong negotiating team there at the NRL to do that, which is fantastic. What there's a commitment to do is work with us in parallel to that to understand, it's not necessarily about agreeing on it, but understanding what is a model that we believe can, deliver for the fans.
Do they come to you and say, look, Fox Sports have offered us this, Amazon have offered us that?
No, not to that detail.
They don't.
No, not to that detail. And would we want to? I don't think so. I mean, again,
what if they're asking for something particularly from the players?
Well, I mean,
what, for example, they're asked for, say, a game on every night.
Yeah, that's different, because if it's a change to the current structure, players we would want to work through that with them to be able to give them confidence to go to the broadcasters and say, this is what we know we can deliver on. Now, if there's some things around the edges that we can work on that broadcasters see great value in, then absolutely we'd be willing to look at it. I'd never say no to anything before I've heard it.
Yeah, but so what's the point? So when V'landys sits down and has his first meeting with Fox or Optus or Amazon or whoever, at what point are you guys brought in?
I think, again, there's no perfect playbook or like timeline where you go, that's when we're going to bring them in. What we'll work with the NRL on is going, right, what's our ideal season length, to be able to understand how much can players continue to endure, in that space. How can we maintain a high performance, competition in that? Where does international rugby league fit, which is a must? Where does Origin fit? And hopefully work through that with the NRL so they've got some level of, I suppose, guardrails to work with.
Right.
But there's no clear line on the moment money hits the table that you need to come to us. We have to rely on trust and transparency in that space to say they will come to us at a time which is going to, be most conducive to getting the best outcome. And what I'd like to think happens is that we'll work with the NRL, in the very near future about what does a competition structure look like with 18, 19, potentially 20 teams, if that was to happen inside that term of the next, collective bargaining agreement.
Which I'm sure it will.
And the other part connected to this, which is a significant one, is what does it look like for the women's with a broadcast deal? Because right now, there's obviously, the women have just started last week when you've got currently 17 clubs playing, 8 games over a weekend, plus you've got 6 women's games. What does that look like moving forward if you want to expand the men's, hopefully stay at 12 for the women's for the next couple of years, to try and build the base there and then work through that and get their sort of pay and benefits, sorted and ensure that the best talent is being retained and, we're building squad sizes and potentially competition length. But what does their season look like? Because right now, I mean, there is no domestic or national competition, certainly in this hemisphere, that is delivering the numbers that the NRLW are.
Yeah. So what I want to get to, though, is when this happens, so when the COVID, which came in roughly, affected the current CBA.
Yes.
And I had an argument with Icon about this a couple of months back on Blitz about it, about grassroots funding, growth of the game, all that. We're sort of at very different ends of the spectrum there on what was happening with the game.
Saw that.
Given that the Players Association, the NRL came together and said we need to build an asset fund, so to speak, I believe it's come to the detriment of investing in grassroots. Will that be adjusted back, do you think? And do the players, what's their collective thought on this as far as how much money has to go back in the grassroots football? Almost, I would not say at the expense of future investment.
Are we saying 500 million? Like what? So I think the starting point is what has the 500 plus million
that's been
done?
There for this collective bargaining?
What has that done? And what else
where
is
it
required?
Well, that's my question.
So
where is it? Have you got any idea where it is, though?
Not
$500 million and clubs are still going to the wall.
Should it be made public, maybe?
So I think before you start to say, well, we need more, I think it's very much about what impact has this money had. Now, you would like to think that moving forward that, we don't need more than 300 million in cash and assets, but also NRL has the ability to spend money in the bank on those things, because it's got to be, there's a part of it that's revenue generating assets that they have to currently spend on. But once they get to the end of the term.
But the money's not being spent, Clint.
Well, it is in certain areas, but.
Not on grassroots.
No,
though.
but that's
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's one of my real bitches about what's happening at the NRL and where the money is supposedly going. Yeah, to John's point, why aren't they showing us how much money they're spending there?
Funding made public.
Well, I think again, it is the fans' game, and maybe there's opportunities for the game to provide outside of just their financial annual reports. To provide an opportunity to get better understanding about what that looks like.
Can you push for that?
We can certainly push for greater transparency. Yeah. But again, the player's role in that is to basically put on the show, go out there, help generate the revenue to then push back to clubs, states, country footy, build asset bases, invest in the NRL to be able to, have their head office put on major events. So again, players aren't taking, 50% like in US sports. And in say AFL,
there's a difference there though too. For example, the NFL they get 50%, isn't it? Is that right? The NFL roughly.
NFL,
NBA, okay. But they're not responsible for grassroots funding.
No.
See, and that's one of the misnomers that's in our game, is that they get 50%, you guys get 43%, which I think is a pretty hefty whack, because in American sport, the colleges are basically the junior development clubs Okay, you got to go through college before you're drafted into any of their major sports over there. You would see in baseball, which I don't know what the funding percentage is there, but that's slightly different. But here, the ARL Commission, who negotiates the broadcast deal, which is the greatest area of funding they get money from, they are responsible for running the game all the way down to under sixes. So that money you can't have a 50-50 model. I don't believe the players should be entitled to a 50-50
and nor do we advocate
model.
for it.
Yeah.
Like, so
I think even 43 is pretty generous.
But also we don't take from, at the moment, like, again, there's a difference, say, with AFL, the PA there is they'll take low 30s, or mid 30% from AFL's distributable revenue, plus they'll take, 10 to 13% of club revenue.
Yeah.
So at the moment, there's no, again, clubs don't contribute to the players' share of revenue.
Yeah.
Now, there's plenty of arguments that have been said around sort of how much should we be running head office on? How much should we be, be distributing back to clubs to have responsibility to invest in certain areas, states to have, a greater responsibility to invest, to get more money to invest in that space. In the EPL, like the governing body runs on, a tenth or less than our governing body runs on.
Yeah, but that's all scale too.
Yeah, of course it is. But at the same time, there are other models to look at. Now, again, I think the key thing here is getting transparency about, what's going on out there. And again, this comes back to, probably our bigger piece is around, what is the strategic plan for the whole of game? What is the strategic plan on pathways and participation? What is the strategic plan for women's, the NRLW and women's, because it's very unique and niche because of the different challenges that exist in the women's game as opposed to the men? And do we want to mirror the men and the women? I don't think so, given the fact that, we need to learn from some of the mistakes that was made in the men's and how do we do it better in the women's with an incredible product. The Pacific strategy, the US strategy, these types of things.
Are you as an organisation asking for that from the NRL though?
Yeah. Well,
have you said to them, we want to see because we all remember famously the John Grant strategic plan came out. What a cock up it was. Came out, we got all these grand plans, and 3 years later they achieved bugger all and they were battling. Yeah. Are you guys sitting there now and saying, look, we want to see what your plan is? Have you asked the NRL for all this? Where's all, what is the game's plan? We know they're doing great. Every time you get a press release from them now, it's about how well they're going, how much money they've got, how much investment they've had. But, and again, it's just crickets when you ask about grassroots or, you look across Sydney right now, like South Sydney used to have one of the, probably the strongest junior competition in Australia as far as A grade and all the rest of it. Now, they are actually starting to bring in teams from outside their areas and that now. And a lot of the Canterbury Junior League have got to mix and match with other junior leagues just to get enough teams to be able to play each other.
And I think that
ultimately, there has to be a point at some point, Clint, though, where that all comes crumbling down.
Well, I think
how you can't maintain this elite level of footy.
No.
If the junior, you're not going. If the junior funding disappears, the junior footy starts to disappear, and rather than have 10,000 kids to pick a number out who used to play rugby league, suddenly you get down to about 300 or 400. It's just common sense.
But that's why
maintain the same standard of player.
But again, that's why, Paul, no different to the women, is that what is the strategic plan and the sustainability model, to be able to continue to develop great people and great players.
Well, when are they going to get to that though?
Yeah, that's what
again, the women's strategy we haven't seen. I know they're in the process of.
We haven't seen a men's strategy.
No, and so, but we have asked to look at what is the US strategy, what is the Pacific strategy, in that space.
And what's the reply been?
Well, we're working on it, or it's in train. So again, I think that the main thing
are they fobbing you off though?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I think the main thing is that the players want to know, because ultimately all of them come from grassroots, Pacific, and they all have an interest, because largely a lot of them have either got brothers, sons, daughters, sisters,
They've
that are
all
all
got it.
playing in that space. So
They've all got an investment
they
in it
do
somewhere.
want to know what is going on. It's not about having veto rights or having agreement rights over it. It's about understanding what the strategy is and then what the player's role in that can be, outside of just going out and putting on the show.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to something else. I want to talk to you about
I've got
one of the real bugbears in the
I've
game.
got head noise, Paul.
Yeah, that's all right.
I've got a lot of head noise over
You're
here.
going all right, mate.
I'm going all right.
You're all right.
It's very
Deep breaths,
complicated,
John.
you two.
Deep
Go on.
breaths, John.
But I'm
I
enjoying
want
it.
to talk to you about this. One of the things that really irritate fans, player movement during contracts. Lockie Galvin, for example, Talon De Silva, two West fans have lost them both. And it's an ongoing thing. It's an annual thing. Players, mid-contract, they've got sometimes years to run on their contract, and they get, they're released, they're let go.
Are we talking about just that, or are we talking about when clubs tap all?
We're talking of both ways, because I get it goes both ways, okay?
I'd say 10 to 1, 20 to 1, it would happen.
Clubs tap
in
players.
whose
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Well, but the one thing is if a player does get tapped by a club, he is at least entitled. He doesn't have to go if he doesn't want to go, and if he wants to sit down to the negotiation, he can argue for the full freight. Okay, if he's on a $500,000 contract, and the club says, "Look, mate, you're not part of our plans next year, even though you signed," he's entitled to say, "Well, I want the full 500." Now that will become a negotiation.
Yeah. It's rare that I've seen that.
Yeah, so I get this, right? And just for the people listening to this, see, contracts are basically there to safeguard both parties. That's all they are. That's not to guarantee you're there at a club for a certain time. They're basically to safeguard your interests, which is the club wants you to play here for 3 years or 4 years, whatever the term is. And that's the club's interest. And your interest is that during that period, you will be paid X amount of money. And that's it. That's essentially all the contract is there for, to safeguard both sides of the agreement, that they get what they believe they're getting. Now, at some point, things will change. But what we're seeing in the game, which is, I think, a particular bugbear of fans, is clubs are negotiating contracts with players, finding out, for example, let's just pick a position. A club has negotiated a deal with a halfback. He's finds out another club's in desperate need of a halfback, so his manager will give them a quiet call. Look, he's got 3 years to go or 2 years to go, but if you put the right deal to him, you might be able to get him. At that point, the club comes in with a much better deal. So the manager will then go to the player, and essentially it's worked out. Kick stones around a training, walk around with the sads for a few weeks, and in the end they'll go, you know what, it's not going to work anyway, we're going to release him. Okay, and that's really annoys fans that players are not sticking to contracts. How can that?
Well, I think there's a perception issue, right? And again, for a lot of it, right, is perception is the reality for people, and that's and that's the way it is. But I'll just take you back
because we're also not given full details.
Yeah,
on
of
things.
course.
So people have to fill in the blanks.
But also,
and they fill it in according to their own bias.
You know that media thrive off speculation and thrive off just throwing things out there that may not necessarily be true.
But it comes from somewhere. Media just don't make it up. But
but it's not about making it up.
But you can explode it a bit.
But
I
agree with Swing.
Absolutely. And so if you go back to, again, from a CBA perspective, because this is the time in which that then you negotiate the whole contracting model. Yeah. And, this is the time when people will throw up, ambit claims around, trade and transfers and all that. And I'll get to that, because our system doesn't work like, other systems, for good reason too. But in the CBA negotiations, when we worked through, one of the main pain points was obviously the 12 months of negotiation that clubs have to go. Largely, it was administrative burden and not wanting to have to negotiate with the roster that was coming off for that 12-month period. But ultimately you'd say, but that's part of the job, but ultimately the other key areas were, again, they wanted to fix up the ability for a player to negotiate with another club prior to their 1 November, deadline. We fixed that. So we stopped that. So you can't negotiate at all prior to the 1 November of the last year. But again, I'll get to this. So then the other one was the right of the incumbent club. So the existing player, so the Brandon Smith type situation when, Melbourne weren't aware that obviously that he was going to go to the Roosters. So we fixed that. So the incumbent club has to know that there is a genuine offer on the table and they must be given rights to come to that player. We fixed that. The other issue was around junior clubs that had developed juniors and rookie players that hadn't seen them in senior level before. They didn't like that other clubs were poaching them before they'd got a chance to see them in the top flight. We fixed that. Now there's a round 6 rule that you cannot negotiate with rookie players in that regard that hadn't played first grade. We also then wanted strong agent reform, which we said we wanted, and this has been for best part of 10 years.
Yep.
We've wanted, and the good agents want reform, the ones that understand it, because ultimately they will benefit.
Yeah.
The good agents will benefit from reform.
Yeah.
And it also allows new and innovative agents to come into the system that can actually help disrupt some of the market and create competitive tension. We wanted stronger agent reform to be able to limit the ability also for clubs and whatnot to use agents as a vice to say, oh, well, it's the agent's fault in this space. We also wanted very strong and enforceable anti-tampering rules. So your situation that you're raising, that if an agent goes to a club,
but that's
outside of
we don't
that,
have strong
no, we
anti-tampering
don't.
rules.
But now they're
Why
they're close to be coming in. We've worked on that with the NRL. That will come in. There's a commitment to bring them in for the next contractual year. So from 1 November, there will be anti-tampering rules put in place. There'll also be agent reform put in, by 1 November as well. So the two
How strong do you think they'll be?
They look strong.
What are they looking at? What are those?
Well, again, it's about the enforceability around getting the clubs, the incumbents, clubs consent to go and then start to shop a player.
What happens
around,
or a player? What are you working on that? What happens if you find right now where it's currently at? What happens if you found an agent, for example, that was breaching the anti-tampering rules?
Well, the penalties are yet to be developed, which is again one of the things
that's all it's about.
Yeah, no, agree. But you need to have the rules to be able to breach someone. If you don't have strong rules, you can't breach them. But our thing is about. It should be a catch-all with regards to penalties. If clubs are breaching, in that space and are not doing what they otherwise should be doing based on the rules, then they also need to be penalised. Whether it's negotiating with an unaccredited agent, that goes on. So it's not just the agent, it's the clubs.
Agents getting things like, clubs are negotiating with an agent for a certain player. And then you find out, a little bit later or further down the track that the club has, gifted the agent something or, given him a share in a pub or, they've given him a share in some investment units, which someone's currently building that's associated with the club, which are being done independent of their player, their client even knowing.
Well, ultimately, that again comes back to the strong rules that need to be put in place that are enforceable, that, if you are found to be breaching, just like players, that they get done on all sorts of incidents.
But what's the players' involvement there? Because I get, on one hand, we don't want to see that, okay? You don't want to hear about an agent doing a private deal with a club to deliver a player. The player's got no idea of it, okay? So... And when you hear about that, you think, well, hang on, why isn't the NRL stepping in and penalising the agent over that? But by the same token, in some of those deals, the player can benefit too.
And I think, but again, that's why the rules are important about, again, getting the rules in place, getting the penalties right, then communicating to the industry so everyone knows that this.
We should already have this though, Clint.
No, you shouldn't.
It should already be in place. All this
but
stuff.
it's not in place to the level that's required. And that's why we've advocated for it. That's why there was an agreement in place now in the CBA to get that done. But then if you go back to your point around,
but the players really after that though. Are the players really after that? Because I know in some instances, and particularly with third parties. See, third parties generally benefit the best players at each club. Okay? The guy that's 25 on the roster or 23 on the roster, he's not going to get a sponsorship with Nike or City Forward or Penfolds or whoever. Okay, they're not going to get that deal. The third parties generally come to the best player, the second best player, the marquee players at each club. They're also the players though that have the greatest voice in the Players Association.
Yeah,
and
not
they
necessarily.
drive well in most cases.
No, not necessarily. I mean, we've got a leadership structure in place.
Who are generally the senior players, like the Cherry Evans still the.
Yes, but that's one player. You know,
Well, who
yes.
else is on that board then?
So we've got Chad Townsend, we've got Sean Lane, we've got Dale Finucane, Chelsea Lenarduzzi, Kennedy Cherrington, Madison Bartlett are on our board. Then we've got our player advisory group that sits underneath that.
Who appointed those, Clint?
So they're all appointed by the players. So
Okay.
they'll nominate, come on, get brought on.
Okay.
So our board is, effectively about 70% player representation.
Was that 3 women and 3 men on there?
3 women and 4 men.
4 men.
Yeah. And then we've obviously got the non-financial members in Deirdre Anderson, Tim Gordon,
Right.
Steve Harker.
So what about who's on the advisory group?
So again, that's a whole range of players. So for the women, it's your likes of Ali Brigginshaw, would be on there. But
Who would be a marquee at the Broncos?
Yeah, but again, it's
Who else?
But it's also the tier below that as well. That we've got a whole range of different players that exist in that space.
Who else is on your group there?
Pardon?
Who else is on that player advisory group? Who are the men on that player advisory group?
Well, the player advisory group is like Jack Cogger as an example.
Right.
So he's
Who
not,
else?
he's not a senior player. So again, there's opportunity
else,
there in that space.
Yeah, who else?
There's
Talk to us,
again
mate.
the amount of
Because
players.
the ones
that
you're
are
not
on there-
naming are the marquee ones you don't want to name.
Well, again, they're not all marquee players. But
Well,
we've
not
got,
Who are the
maybe not
marquee
all, but
players?
you've named one player who's not a marquee player.
we've got plenty. We've got plenty on there. Go on our website, Paul. You'll be able to see them on our
Clint,
website.
now, Paul, you know what I want to know? Is there a cap on third parties?
No, but it's also the fact that it's up to the salary cap auditor to have discretion over approving third-party agreements.
So once upon a time, we introduced the salary cap so we didn't get rich clubs to buy the premiership. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah,
But they can
that
still.
was one reason.
Yeah, but there's no cap on a salary cap on
third
third party. Sorry, so they can still do it if they wanted to.
Yeah, but again, it's at the discretion of the salary cap auditor to review every third party that comes in. And again, they investigate that with a high level of scrutiny based on, they've knocked back, third party agreements as well that don't stack up. I mean, it's a space that, in our view, there's opportunity to commercialise the players outside of just the salary cap. I certainly don't conform to the view that that clubs can't, that there's not enough sponsors out there to come in and want to get involved in the game and sponsor a player from a third party perspective. The game's never been in a better position than what it is now. And so, is it perfect? I doubt it, but is any model? I don't think any model is going to be perfect, across the world, John, with regards to anything.
But we're not worried about any other model. We're worried about rugby league.
No, but the point is the fact that go and find me a model that is going to absolutely guarantee that everything's going to be above board. Like, you can't. I think the NRL's got a process in place in which they work through.
Yeah.
They'll investigate things that are brought to their attention. The salary cap auditor has got obviously a really important job to work through that. I don't think the game's ever been closer or in a better position than what it is now.
One of the things they could do, though, is allow the NRL access to their financial records, the players' financial records and their families' financial records. So if for example, that a player is copping a sponsorship on the side that nobody has declared, which I believe happens, then the player, look, he doesn't have to declare it, okay? But if he's getting an earn and is not declaring it in his tax return, then he's breaking the law. Okay, so there's an added consequence to receiving that money. Now, in the NRL terms, in tax terms, he's done. If he declares it, he's done nothing wrong. Even though it might be an illegal third party, in NRL terms, legally he's done nothing wrong. But if you're allowed access to their financial records, and I know this really irritates the players, to allow the NRL access to that. But if they allowed access to that, then the player, if he's not declaring third-party income to the tax department, he's taking that risk of a future audit or something along those lines, which would be, look, it's not going to fix it, but it's another layer of scrutiny and protection.
But we're like, I mean, this becomes like the Gestapo that we're then.
It's not Gestapo.
Well, then we're now reaching into players' financial records, and you're sort of going, well, you either trust the system or you don't. If you don't trust the system, okay, but then reform needs to happen inside the system.
But do you trust the system?
Well, I think you have to start from a place of trust. And
but once you hear the stories, like clearly you've been around long enough, you're an ex-player, you know the rorts that have gone on. I don't know anyone that trusts that the salary cap is 100%.
Do you think the competition is more equal now than it ever has been in the game's history?
Well, I'm arguing that's because of the refereeing, but that's another matter.
Yeah, but these are the things.
No, it is more even. I get that.
But so therefore, I don't think the model is broken. Can it be adjusted? Yeah, sure.
It's not broken.
And again, these are the things that we work through.
I'm not saying it's broken
with the players,
but it is an irritation when you see, for example, what's happening in poor old West Tigers. Every time they get a player that starts to go any good, one of the other clubs come in and poach him.
Yeah. Well, these are all the matters that we'll work through with our respective groups, like in our leadership structure. One bloke that I forgot to mention is obviously Felice Kafusi on our board, who's been great. And so, but again, I think all these things can come back up again, obviously when it's bargaining time. But I still think that there is a lot of conjecture around, obviously, the player movement and whatnot. But I think it still comes back to some of the good clubs are managing the situations much better than the others.
Yeah.
And the respect that some of the clubs are providing players when they are asking them, is this the place for you, for future years? The differences that exist in that space are quite significant.
But the thing is about it, mate, is... Yeah, one of the biggest things in the game is the bond between the fans and the players. Okay, and that needs to be kept. That needs to be maintained. Yeah, I would argue that most fans follow a piece of clothing at the moment. It's because players can. It's no longer like they used to just arrive at a club and stay there for the duration. They follow either the black and gold or the blue and yellow or the red and white or whatever. But there is a bond between players and the fans, and that needs to be maintained. And part of that is integrity in the cap and the payments and contracts.
Yeah, I understand that, Paul. But also what we've seen is a significant rise in fans connecting with players at their current at the club that they support, as well as rival players across the board, because of the accessibility that players have around their social media and all that.
I don't know. But again, I don't know many fans that sit there and they're a chartered member of the rival players fan club just because they like to play. Like fans follow the players.
Or maybe not at your age, but there are actually. But there's plenty of fans that, particularly from a kid's perspective, that are across.
Excuse me, used to, and now I understand why the fans always see a different side of used to. How was the witness box, mate? Was it good? Did you enjoy it?
It's
Have
great.
You enjoyed it?
I think that, again, this is like...
Have you enjoyed being in that chair?
Absolutely. I think
being interrogated by...
Well, what people want, I would suggest, is that they want someone asking the questions, and if I can't answer it, then again, I can go away and find the right answer. I mean, the point is that we obviously want to be transparent with the fans. We're not going to... We are not going to put forward the position that everyone agrees with us all the time. That's not our job. Our job is to make sure that we strike a balance between absolutely advancing the interests of the players and protecting their rights and making sure their voices are heard, as well as what is in the best interest of the game. Because the alternative approach is, we'll just go after big percentage shares. We won't give a shit about, anyone else bar
but
the players.
You wouldn't survive if you tried that.
But exactly. But that's my point. So then you've got to strike a balance between that. We allow things like the salary cap, which is a restraint of trade. We allow, things in the place like...
Why won't you agree to mid-season transfers or even a draft?
Because a draft doesn't work in our system where why would clubs like Penrith, Brisbane, Newcastle, now the Dragons...
Yeah, but for every club you name there's a club, I would argue, who would argue for a draft.
Yeah, but then you sort of go, okay, well, why would any of them then invest in junior sport if they cannot keep their juniors, and you don't get a situation like a Penrith that grew...
Because they've been given the money from the NRL to do that.
Yeah. but they're operating at different financial models. You've got a Broncos that has a revenue like that will generate, about 48 million, and you'll have a club, at the bottom end of the table that are, 12 and 14 million. So you can't have you can't have trades, which is the EPL model or the US model, because it doesn't have the financial capacity to deal with it. And you'll have. So
you'll never agree to a trade window?
No, not at the moment. Like, again, for me,
other than that objection, what are the other objections to that?
Well, the difference between what players are exposed to from club to club is still too great. And there's no way, if I have a son or a daughter, I would not want my son or daughter just getting drafted to a club that potentially is not in the best interest for their future career. When you know that your career can be over like that in our game.
Okay.
They need to have the ability and free agency to go to a club of their choosing. Now, you only have 17 employment opportunities, and then you've got a list of 30 and then 6. In the women's, you've got 12 employers, plus you've got 24 spots and 6 spots. That is a limited amount to work through. You're also not talking about the same financial model that exists in Europe and the US, when you've got, 8, 10, 12, 20 times the money that they are getting. When you literally are saying everyone points to $1 million player, that's about 6 players in the game out of 600.
But okay, if that's the case, then the different funding and you put up the Broncos and whatnot, why wouldn't the players push for unequal funding, which is something that has been raised?
I'm not against it.
You're not against
No.
that? So the poorer clubs, for example, you look at West Tigers or the Canberra Raiders or those clubs that aren't generating, the Gold Coast Titans aren't generating the money that the Broncos are, that the Roosters are. Why wouldn't they get more funding from the NRL than what the other, rather than it's being uniform?
I'm not against disequal funding. It'd be like saying Voldemort, though, like in amongst certain stakeholders.
Yeah, I know the reaction.
But ultimately, if I'm a top club, I would, whether or not they would agree to it, I don't know. That's not my call. But ultimately, if I'm foregoing revenue that is going to the bottom clubs, I'd want to be damn sure that they're operating the way in which, that money is actually going to be maximised.
Yeah.
And that the return on that investment is going to be seen at some point.
Yep.
Because why would I then give up?
I agree with that.
Why would I then give up money, to then have someone that band-aids over cracks?
But that's an argument you can't win then, isn't it?
No, but can you?
Well, you can't. If you take that to the NRL, they drop that argument.
Yeah.
Some clubs drop that argument.
Yeah, but I think
there's
a model there to say, well, okay, everyone's going to get equal funding to a point, and then it's like, okay, if you want extra, you have to deliver something back to pathways and participation.
Well, that's exactly right.
Growth
a club wants
juniors.
An extra $5 million in funding.
Yes.
We're going to put that $5 million straight into our junior development, and we're going to put that into our grassroots clubs and try and develop and bring. Why can't you?
Well, things like that, fan engagement, membership, membership models, licensing and merch, research and tech, all these types of things. That
they can always find something for it.
But again, this comes back to then the strategic objectives of the game. What are they, and what do we want to do moving forward? Because I think if you get that, then you can start to look at models where you can say everyone will get equal money to a point. If you want more, it's capped out at a certain amount.
Yeah.
But you have to deliver something that goes towards the overall objectives of the game.
Yeah.
But at the moment, different clubs are going to be doing different things for different reasons.
Well, at the moment, what we're seeing is clubs spending too much money. Those lower clubs, those poorer clubs, and the clubs that are struggling on the ladder, they're basically putting money into an exaggerated salary cap, where they're paying. They've got an added premium on anybody they try to recruit. They've got to pay an extra 10% or 15% in salary just to get the guy to leave the club that they're at to go to a club that they know is not going to be as successful as the one they're already at.
But again, this is my point, is the fact that even right now with a salary cap, based on, what we know from players, is one of the main reasons why they're leaving or changing clubs is club culture, opportunity, relationship with the coach, club environment, those types of things.
But also cash.
Oh yeah, that's of course that's
Let's be honest.
But then how have Melbourne and Penrith been able to retain a roster if it's all about cash? You know, like
because it could be all about cash.
But again, that
might be a discussion we have to have off camera.
But again, it's very much the fact that players want to feel part of a great culture.
Yeah,
right?
I get that.
They will always stay for less, you know, if they think that they're seen, they're heard, they're respected. And yes, but a good culture then will transfer into winning, you know, at a certain point in time. But if you've got a model where right now clubs are paying, you know, 10, 15, 20% over market value on players, that's probably more a reflection of your club culture and where you are in the grand scheme of things, which then can have an impact on your cap management.
But could the fact it's not changing is what frustrates a lot of fans.
What's not changing?
The fact that for the last, if you go through the 26 years of the NRL's existence, I reckon there'd be less than a third of those grand finals in 26 years. Less than a third of the now 17 teams would contain a grand final that did not have a Melbourne, a Roosters, or a Brisbane in it.
So what is that? What's the point? Is the point that
the point is that these
management of clubs is not at the level?
That's part of it. Well, I don't know, but that's what that comes down to is salary cap and whether it's being properly policed.
I don't think so. I think that's
that's the argument that we hear.
Yeah, but that's a cop out.
The fact that those clubs have continued to maintain their success beyond generational players. For example, the Melbourne are still going so well, despite the fact that Cameron Smith and Cooper Cronk and Billy Slater have all retired.
Yeah, because they've got a great pathway. They've got a great recruitment and retention policy.
And Craig's been
and they've had consistency with leadership. Consistency of leadership.
But some other clubs have had total changes.
Yeah, but that's the point. Players don't like constant changes in leadership and constant changes of coaches, because one coach will come in, and we've seen this at a couple of clubs, that one coach comes in, brings a roster in, that coach then goes, new coach comes in, he shoulder taps 8 or 10 players, which then damages the culture of the club inside, which then further delays success, which then blows your cap, because now you're paying for only 24 players in a 30.
They're going to go through another one now that Des is on his way.
So again, these are the things that, again, you're not, whether it's through, short-term thinking or management of roster or, effectiveness of boards or governance or decision-making or leadership. But I certainly don't think is fair to make the assumption or the allegation of, well, just because Melbourne and Penrith have done this outside of what is the norm, then that they must be doing something, behind the curtain. It's not really respecting what they have done consistently, and the fact that they've got players that are staying there.
There's an argument to that.
And ultimately, Penrith, some of those players that have played in the 4 and 5 grand finals and 4 premierships, they've been playing together since they were 16, 17, 18. That is a club that made a strategic decision to say, we are going to invest in our juniors and we're going to try and retain them. Then consistently they lost Burton and Kickow and Coruscant, Luai, Crichton, all over the years. And because they've built from within, the players have been part of the club, been a part of their system. They understand the system. They come into first grade. It's like, ultimately just, putting another tyre on the same car. It's just that just still drives exactly the same because they've been part of the system. Melbourne did it extremely well for the last 20 odd years.
But some clubs, I don't think are being certainly in it's a bit of both. In one aspect, they're not earning the opportunity to do that, but I think in another aspect, they're not actually given the opportunity to do that because of the way some of those systems work, like the fact that it's just the market is almost too free.
But the system is where in the world would you see a situation where a 4-time premiership winning player in Luai goes to a 3-time spoon club? Nowhere in the world. Nowhere in the world. You would never get him traded and drafted to the lowest performing club for 3 consecutive years. The Tigers went early in their recruitment strategically, and they did the right thing in going early while it wasn't staring down the barrel of another spoon.
Yeah.
If they had have waited till the end of the year to try and sign Luai, you could nearly guarantee that his market value or what his asking price would have significantly increased.
Well, he got a fair whack.
Yeah, but he did. But it wouldn't have. They would have either completely missed him, or they would have just been outpriced.
Yeah.
Because at that time they weren't staring down the barrel of another spoon. Now, Taruva is another one that, again, they went there. Same with the Dogs. When they signed Burton and Kickow and those sort of players, they were able to build a roster around big signings. It also gives fans confidence in the future. It gives them hope, something to work. The club then commercialises those guys to say, hey, they're coming next year. We can go and sponsor, would you like to now sponsor us?
Yeah.
Now, nowhere in the world would you be able to do that. Clubs can now strategically work through when do we want to go into the market for these players. Now, they have full rights to wait and not go in the market for as long as they can. And if you look at the three major conjective issues that happened, you've got Daly Cherry Evans, who gave his club ample time to move on.
Yeah, I'm cool.
They went out and signed Jamal Fogarty.
Yep.
Great signing for the club. Dylan Brown, that the fans thought that he was on a much longer term deal than he actually was, which is why then we removed player and club options from public display. The irony of that was people thought that we were removing transparency.
Anger. But all you did by removing that clause from public display.
No, because what it does,
the clause altogether.
No, but what it does do is it provides absolute transparency to say this is the only time that you have your player guaranteed under contract, not this make believe. 7 years when it's actually under 4.
Doing that then?
But that's my point, is the fact that now you've seen that when a club announces a player on a 5-year deal, then that builds all this hope and excitement around it. But then a player doesn't activate his 3-year, on the 3rd year. Now it's the player's fault. But don't sign the deal then. Don't put the deal in front of the player. And then the other one around Galvin, he said, I'm not staying at this club.
Yeah.
Right? That created a whole shitstorm in itself.
Yeah.
So the three, that 1 November, a changing 1 November doesn't fix any of those things. Because I don't know what you want a player to do. So are we saying that a player can never say to the incumbent club, I'm not going to stay at this club? I don't want to stay. But a club can go, which again comes into the media. It's like, Club X has given player Y the opportunity to go and speak to other clubs. Like the difference in reporting is very different. You're effectively saying you're tapped. We don't want you, which is fine. But ultimately the player still needs to be given the right to perform so he stays on the market to be able to move around.
But the difference in reporting is the difference in, I'm not protecting the media here.
No.
But I'm saying the difference in reporting of what the terms are is generally the difference in what information has been released, and that's because the clubs take charge of the release. They release it in favourable circumstances towards themselves, and the player, who often has very little media experience or whatever, they just go along for the ride. They're happy to trust in the club that they do it all right,
but also
not realising that the club's putting out
but also
slightly wrong information.
John, as you know, and Paul, like players are jammed in a position where they're not going to want to rock the boat in certain situations, because then they just get blacklisted and it's like, you're a troublemaker. We're now not going to potentially sign you. So most of the time, if a player is even tapped,
but if it's a rule that the full terms of the contract are released, that safeguards the player from being listed as a troublemaker, because that has to be released.
But again, what we're saying is the fact that you should only put in the public domain what the guaranteed contractual term is.
Well, why don't we do that?
It is now.
It is now.
So the
we
options,
haven't seen that with
the options are removed because they're not guaranteed. They're not guaranteed. That you have no guarantee when it's an option, because it's either a club or a player option. So whether it's a Luai or other clubs, you go, it's a 2-year deal. That's all he's signed for, because that's all that he's guaranteed on. Yes, there are opportunities to extend because there's options there. But that you shouldn't be building false hope in the fans and the market, and then say if a player doesn't take up that option, that he's now the devil. Like that. I don't think that's fair.
No, I get that. All right, let's just finish off just quickly. When the next broadcast or collective bargaining agreement is finalised, what do you think the salary cap's going to be looking at?
It's hard to say. I mean, ultimately, right now, the cap is what it is. We think players are paid.
Will be as much
fairly.
as double though.
Well, it all comes back to when you look at the broadcast revenue.
It's been going that way.
Yeah, I mean, the broadcast revenue is 65, 70% of the overall revenue.
Yeah.
Largely, that's going to dictate what
The cap is.
what the cap is going to be. And then it's up to us to work through, okay, of all the other revenues that come in, then, what is the appropriate structure? What we always need to strike a balance with is that you can't just increase the salary cap, because then you'll get an inflation at the top end, and the middle and bottom get squeezed or get pushed down. So that's why you need to continue to push up minimum wage to ensure there's some level of connection with the top.
Yeah.
Of course, like any major company, the best, those that do the most get rewarded the best.
Yeah.
Or those.
But you do need to push up the minimum.
Yes, of course you do.
Wage. That's
and
because
so,
otherwise the top three get all the cash.
Of course. So that's why again we've got those. That's why it becomes. And I have to say that this is where those leadership structures that we've mentioned, they are so in alignment with regards to looking at taking a bottom-up approach, because the alternative to our leadership groups, whether it's a player advisory group or board members or delegates, is just tip it in the cap, don't push up minimum wage, give it all to Origin and rep payments, and all of us will benefit. Yeah. That's not the model that existed, particularly in the last decade and a bit since I've been around as general president or in my various roles with the RLPA. That the players are absolutely wanting to make sure that we look after the players, from training wage to protection of their contracts, to minimum salaries, to retirement accounts, to these funds like the Injury Hardship Fund, Past Player Medical Support Fund, General Hardship Fund, which you two can access it at some point, no doubt, if you ever fall on hard times.
I
am.
I was actually going to talk about that.
So again, but these are all things that again, our players are very cognizant of, about giving back for the collective.
Yeah.
Never has the game been in a situation where the existing players are investing in a past player program and funds that can be used by past players the way the current players are.
Sure. Okay. Sounds good. All right, mate. I want to thank you for coming in.
Did you get any questions, John?
I had so many questions. I told you, I got head noise.
Yeah.
These are way too advanced for for what
we might just do our own one, just you and I.
I think it'd be great.
Yeah.
A lot of people probably don't even know. You're born in America, aren't you?
Yes.
Waikiki Beach.
Yeah.
And you represented the USA in the World Cup 2013.
Yes. Yeah. We shocked the world in 2013.
What was it like playing for your country of birth?
Oh, it was great. I mean, it's one of my best memories that I've got. And it's something that I'm really proud of, given, I mean, when you're talking about a team that literally had kind of three NRL, 3 or 4 NRL players in it, or had played NRL, and then the rest of them are train drivers, dog walkers, diesel mechanics, those types of things that are all just sort of battlers. And then you find yourself winning a really unwinnable pool, where we played 3 games in literally 5 days.
Wow.
Because they didn't think we were going to win our pool, and then find ourselves against Australia in the quarterfinals. Yeah. I mean, that was the highlight for these guys. His career, and
that's amazing. But honestly, because the past guests we've had Victor Adler, he represented England, as you know, and the others like Mark Carroll, Tim Brasher, Ian Roberts, Australia. But to have someone come on to represent America's, I think it's outstanding. It's great.
Yeah, it was great. It was and it's again, I think it's a real highlight, particularly one that I got to experience with my old man.
Yeah.
Where he came over, and it was just on the back of the birth of my first child. It was literally 5 days later. I was off to the World Cup, which I wasn't going to play.
Wow, how big?
And
how good?
My wife said that I'll never hear the end of this if you don't go on that. So go, and I'll be all right. So I've got to thank her for it. And then to have him over there and, be around it, be a part of the team, on the piss with us, experiencing, beating the Cook Islands in Bristol and beating Wales and, those types of things.
They're memories you're never going to forget.
No.
Now, tell me, is it true that, Dad, of course, the glass eye?
Yes.
Was it the emblem of the Newcastle Knights?
Yeah, well, he was a Para fan originally.
Oh, okay.
Because his dad was a Tigers man because he was senior sergeant at Eastwood and Balmain.
Senior sergeant?
Yeah.
Okay.
So he brought Ciro through. You might have ran into him at some point.
Yes, I was just about to say that. Of course.
And then so he supported Para, and then that's where he became good mates with Jack Gibson.
Yeah.
And all those sort of Para, and he had a glass eye with a Parramatta eel on it. And then the moment the Knights came into the comp in 88.
88.
In 88, he then got a glass eye. He put the Para glass eye away in the box,
right?
And got the Knights glass eye made. And he used to wear that on most occasions at the Knights games. We'd find it on the floor after a few drinks, no doubt. And he had another glass eye.
Yeah, punter's eyes, didn't he? Yeah, one each way.
Another glass eye that he had where it was just if someone was carrying on the piss, he'd drop a glass eye in that says, don't mind me, I'm pissed, in the bottom of the thing, and blokes would be drinking it, carrying on a treat, and then see this glass eye like looking up at him, and they'd be going off.
Could you imagine?
Clint, yourself, you've had a great career. I mean, you've played a number of clubs: Penrith, Melbourne, Hull FC. Is it Hull FC overseas?
Dirty word, mate. Hull KR.
Hull KR.
Yeah.
You've played over 200 first grade games. Now, why I'm asking all this is what we usually do towards the end of the show. The number one pest, and all the players you've played with around the world. Who's the biggest pest?
Oh, the biggest pest. Mick Vella was up there at KR. He was a pest.
Michael Vella.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, the Parramatta forward. Yeah.
Talk like this. Oh, come on, that sort of thing, and carry on. He's just big, lanky, and carrying on. Kurt Gidds was a pest on the drink.
Okay.
Just keep hitting you on the balls or grabbing you on the arm, just that sort of stuff. He used to do it to my old man all the time, and Dad would be going, if I can get hold of you, I'll give you one of the best short rights you've ever seen. So
that's funny. That's
a
beauty.
So yeah, but no, I mean, I played with some of the best characters and best blokes. I had a blessed career to play with guys like Joey and BK and Danny Badeiras, Matt Gidley, Steve Simpson, Billy Pete, and those sort of guys, and obviously at Melbourne with Coops, and GI Kingy.
Let me jump in there. Who was the funniest?
The funniest, Hughesy was up there.
Mark?
Yeah. He doesn't like the term anymore, but Boozy Hughes, he was up there, and Joey, Joey's wit was second to none.
Hasn't changed.
His also just the diversity in thought was out there. And having chaperoned Joey on a few occasions, there were always good laughs and good values, and but even like blokes like Dukes was really funny because he was so different. But we had some classics.
This one's my favourite. Who loved the mirror? Who loved looking in the mirror?
Oh, Johnny Morris, he was big on that. He had a great rig, but he loved it. I think he was the first bloke to wear product in his hair at the Knights. In there, when he came all the way from Singleton, from Scone, Scone Thoroughbreds. So I mean, he was probably up there, and Shandor, he liked looking at himself at Penrith, and. We've had a fair few. Dallas Johnson actually used to love looking at himself.
Did he?
Used to cover up his bunged ear with his, with his hair. So that was. So we had some, good people.
Our best is there's no one's overtaken it. Tim Brasher.
Brash,
when he got his taboo, he was on the bench and he got a tap on the shoulder. And Paul will tell you the story better than I. He had a comb in his sock. So as he got the tap, he brushed his hair and out he went. I don't think that can be beaten, Paul, can it?
It's tough.
It's a tough one.
He set a high bar, old Timmy.
It's been a great show, Paulie.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I really appreciate it coming on.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Are you two going to be okay?
Absolutely.
We're always okay, mate.
Absolutely.
Okay.
People actually don't know.
It's always a pleasure seeing you, mate.
we actually have a quiet beer every now and then, don't we?
Yeah, you two are just too advanced for.
Without anyone knowing about it.
Sorry, I didn't ask any more questions, but you're just too
That's
advanced.
all right.
No worries.
All right.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks. See you next week.